She thought he'd use her like the others, but he gave her a name instead. The wind on the ridge sounded different that morning. Not louder, not colder, just different. Eli Mercer noticed things like that now. The way the breeze scraped the metal siding of the cabin, the way dust settled slower when the air turned heavier. It had been 41 days since he last saw another living person, 89 since he heard one speak. Not that he missed it. Most people only brought trouble or noise, or both. But silence had a shape, a feel, and that morning, it shifted. He was kneeling beside the irrigation tubes, one hand braced against the dry soil, the other tightening a clamp that hadn't sealed right since the last storm. Sweat dripped from his temple, rolled along the scar behind his ear, and fell silently onto the dirt. The planet's sun, two-thirds strength now due to atmospheric haze, cast a rust-colored glow over the valley. The world looked dead. It wasn't, not quite, but it was trying to be. Eli stood slowly, brushing dust from his palms onto the thigh of his pants. His gloves had worn through a week ago, and he hadn't found another pair in the last salvage trip. He stared at the western perimeter of his land, beyond the patch of brittle root crops and the empty water drums. That's when he felt it. Not saw, not heard, felt. Something was coming. He reached for his side out of habit, but there was no weapon there. He'd never carried one. Not because he didn't believe in them, but because the kinds of people who came with a weapon in hand were different from the ones who came with nothing. If someone came to kill him, so be it. If someone came begging, that was a choice, a different kind of desperate. Eli could live with that. Then he saw her. At first she was just movement against the ridge, a shimmer, a sway, thin, staggering. Her gait was uneven, like one leg dragged slightly behind the other. As she got closer, the light caught on something metallic wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Fabric, maybe. Silk, torn, dust-caked. Not from here. He narrowed his eyes. The woman, at least he thought she was, moved like someone pushed too far past the edge. Her body didn't walk. It collapsed forward in slow motion. One arm hung limply. The other clutched at the tattered remnants of her wrap, as if modesty still mattered even now, even here. Her feet were bare, bleeding. Her skin was pale, not white, but tinted blue-gray, almost iridescent in places, bruised in others. Her hair hung in knotted ropes down her back. White, but dulled with grime and blood. Eli didn't move, didn't raise a hand, didn't speak. She kept coming. When she reached the border of his land, the point where he'd stacked rusted plasteel rods to form a crude perimeter, her knees gave out. She fell hard, caught herself with one arm, coughed once, then looked up. Her eyes locked onto his. They weren't human eyes. Too wide. The irises a soft violet haloed with silver. They shimmered like cracked glass, like something beautiful trying not to break. Her mouth opened. "Don't!" Her voice was so dry it barely made it out. "Turn me in." Eli's throat felt dry too, but not from dehydration. He hadn't spoken aloud in days, maybe weeks. His vocal cords itched from the thought of use. She blinked slowly as if waiting for the blow to come, or the shout, or the gun. When none did, she tried again. "I'll give you anything." A pause, her lips split as she forced the next words out. "My body, just don't call them. Please." Eli inhaled. Let it out slow. There was no one behind her. No drone tailing her. No branded slaver convoy cresting the ridge. If she'd been dumped, they weren't coming back. He scanned the sky instinctively. Nothing. He turned, walked back toward the cabin. Didn't look behind. The door hissed when he keyed it open. An old system, still working thanks to a backup battery he'd rigged from a shattered ag droid 6 months ago. He stepped inside and left the door open. Just enough. Behind him, nothing but wind. Then a scrape. Then a shuffle. Then silence again. And then the faintest sound of fingers brushing metal. The woman entered on hands and knees. Not crawling. Dragging. Her body didn't seem to belong to her anymore. It was a thing she pulled behind her, joints shaking from cold or fear or both. She paused just past the threshold. Her head stayed low, breath ragged. One hand clutched the floor, as if it might disappear. Eli stood near the stove. A small pot simmered there. He ladled soup, more broth than meal, into a steel bowl and set it on the low table. He didn't speak. just sat down across the room and watched. The woman didn't move toward the bowl, not right away. Her eyes flicked toward it, then to him, then back. She didn't trust it, not because it might be poison, but because she didn't trust kindness. Not anymore. Eventually she reached out. Her arm trembled as she brought the bowl close. She didn't sit at the table. She stayed on the floor, curled, defensive, her knees pulled up, one shoulder still bare. Eli let her eat. She drank too fast at first, burned her tongue, winced, then slowed, then finished. When the bowl was empty, she stared at it a long time, as if unsure if it was real, or if it would be taken away. "I said," she began, voice rough. "You could have me. I meant it." Eli shook his head. "You're not currency." Her brow furrowed. "Then why?" "Because you needed help." Her laugh was short, sharp, broken. "That's never been enough before." "It is here." They didn't speak again that night. Eli handed her a blanket. Didn't drape it over her, just set it near. "If you need sleep," he said, "it's clean." She didn't thank him, didn't look at him, but she took it. And when he turned off the light, she didn't scream, didn't flinch. That night, for the first time in years, Eli didn't fall asleep, wondering if he'd made a mistake staying alone. The second morning, he found her sitting at the edge of the cot, staring at the corner of the room. Her hair hung over her face. She didn't notice him at first. Not until he coughed softly and handed her a bowl. She accepted it. No words, just a quiet nod. She ate slower now, measured, but still alert, like a deer waiting for the snap of a twig. After breakfast, she finally spoke. "What do you call this place?" "Cabin," Eli said. "I meant the land." "It doesn't have a name." She looked around. "Feels like it should." He shrugged. "You can name it if you want." That caught her off guard. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "You're here. That's enough." Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy this time. She stood slowly, gripping the cot's edge for balance. "I'm Nara," she said. He didn't repeat it, didn't say, "Nice to meet you," just nodded once, then turned to check the water filter. Nara didn't ask for anything that day, but she didn't stay idle either. She watched him work, then mimicked, helped carry compost, helped adjust solar panels. She didn't talk much, but her hands stayed busy. Eli didn't correct her when she placed the tool tray backward or over-tightened a pipe. He let her figure it out, and she did. That night, she sat closer to the stove, the blanket still around her shoulders. She stared at the flame for a long time. "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" she asked. Eli didn't look up. "No. Why not?" "Because you're not a product they care to retrieve." Her voice cracked. "That's the worst part." "You're right." He set his tool down. "You're not theirs anymore," he said. "You never were." Outside, the wind howled, but inside, for the first time, neither of them felt like a ghost. And so the silence changed. It was no longer something that surrounded them. It was something they shared, and somehow that made it warmer, even on a planet that had tried so hard to kill everything soft. Nara didn't sleep the second night. Not fully. Her eyes closed, but her body never let go. Her back stayed tight. Her fingers clutched the blanket Eli had left her like a shield. She didn't know how to sleep without tension. Stillness didn't mean peace, not where she came from. In the places she had been, silence meant something was about to happen. In this cabin, it meant nothing was, but that was its own kind of terror. She opened her eyes just before sunrise. The low vent lights cast amber slashes across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a filtration system hummed. A breeze passed under the doorway, dry but not cold. Her legs were sore. Her ribs ached, but she was alive. Her eyes scanned the room for him. Eli was in the corner, adjusting something on the wall. His back was to her. He wore the same shirt, gray, thin, sleeves rolled. His movements were quiet, not stealthy, just careful. Everything he did like someone used to being watched but never wanting to be noticed. She cleared her throat. He turned slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of his eye. "Morning." That was all he said. He didn't ask how she slept, didn't offer her food right away, just turned back to the wall and kept working. Nara sat up slowly, wincing as her spine protested. Her feet touched the metal floor. Cold bit her soles. She didn't realize she'd spoken aloud until she heard her voice. "Why aren't you asking what I've done?" Eli paused. His hand hovered over the tool bracket. "I don't need to know," he said. You don't even know what I am. I know what you're not. She stood. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. She pulled it tighter. I offered you everything, she said, sharper now. My body, my service. I know what kind of world this is. I know what a man wants when a woman collapses on his doorstep. Eli turned, met her eyes. I'm not the world. Her breath hitched. No anger. No defense. Just that sentence. She sat back down slowly. He brought her a bowl of rehydrated grain and set it near the cot. Nara stared at it. No words, no expectations. I don't get it, she whispered. You don't have to, he said. Later that morning, she followed him outside. The sun was barely up, casting dull light across the fractured soil. The air smelled like heat and rust. A storm was weeks off, but Eli said he could feel the charge building in the ground. Nara didn't speak. She helped him clear the filtration lines near the grow trench. At one point, she reached into the water valve without being asked. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her hands were steady now. You've done this before, he said. Not in years, she replied. But it comes back. Most things do. They worked in silence for an hour. When she dropped a tool and flinched, he only said, It's just a spanner. She didn't reply, but something inside her loosened a little. Back inside, she wiped her hands on a rag and sat near the heat lamp. Eli moved through the space with quiet purpose. She watched him carefully, the way he moved from task to task without fanfare. No wasted energy, no sudden movements. She found herself speaking again. They used to say I was too sharp. He glanced over. For what? For training. Too alert, too opinionated. They wanted quiet girls, obedient ones. Eli didn't respond. They said I'd be better off in specialty service, not domestic. Still no reply. Do you even care? She snapped. He turned, leaned his hip against the counter, and met her eyes fully. I care that you're here. I care if you want to be. Not what someone said about who you were before. She stared at him. That was it. No soft words, no pity, no curiosity. Just space. I was sold 3 times, she said. The words came out faster than she expected, like they had been waiting too long. First to a prep unit, then to a private buyer, then to someone who thought they could break me better. Eli didn't move. They failed? He asked. She looked at her hands. I'm still breathing. That counts. That night she asked to make the soup. He didn't stop her. She stirred it carefully, hands remembering long-forgotten rhythms. Eli sat on the floor this time, not at the table. She ladled 2 bowls, set one in front of him, sat across, her legs folded beneath her. They ate in silence. Halfway through, she set her bowl down. I want to understand you. Eli looked up. There's nothing to understand. You haven't asked for anything, haven't touched me, haven't told me to leave. No. Then what's your angle? I don't have one. Everyone has an angle. He shook his head. Not me. Not anymore. She leaned forward. I've been used as currency for 5 years. I know what comes after kindness. I know how the cycle works. You get fed, get warm, get clean, and then someone says, now it's your turn. He stared into his bowl. I won't say that. Then what do you want? He looked at her. To sleep without worrying who I became. She went still. That sentence hung in the air. Not romantic, not tragic, just honest. That night she lay on the cot again. Eli unrolled the mat by the wall. She watched him. Why do you sleep on the floor? You need the cot more. I'm not fragile. Didn't say you were. He turned the lantern down to its lowest setting. She stared at the ceiling. You don't know me, she said again. He lay down, arms behind his head. You don't know me either. The 3rd morning she rose before him. The air was cold. She pulled his spare jacket from the hook and wrapped it around her. It smelled like dust and metal and warmth. She stepped outside barefoot. The sun hadn't risen, but the sky was blooming violet. She walked to the edge of the trench line and looked over the field. The crops were small, sickly, but they were alive. Behind her, the door hissed open. Eli stepped out, coffee mug in hand. She didn't turn. Do you want me to leave? She asked. No. Why? Because this place is less empty with you in it. She turned then, just slightly. That's not love, she said. No. It's not a reason. It's enough. She didn't smile. But she didn't frown either. just stood there in his jacket, breathing air that didn't carry fear. That day, she worked beside him again, more confident, still watchful. He gave her space, let her breathe, let her exist. She didn't know what to do with that, but she knew it wasn't a bargain. And that, for the first time, felt like something she might learn to believe. Nara didn't realize she was humming until Eli looked up from the filtration unit. It wasn't a song, not really, just a pattern of breath and sound that escaped as she sorted through stripped wiring. Her hands worked methodically, fingers looping frayed ends into new connections. When she noticed his gaze, she froze. The silence snapped back between them like a taut cable. Eli didn't speak, just returned to his task. Still, her mouth went dry. Nara dropped the wire cutter into the box beside her and wiped her palms on her thigh. "Sorry." "For what?" he asked without looking. "I wasn't thinking." "You're allowed to make noise." She swallowed. "Not where I'm from." Eli's hands paused. He didn't look at her, didn't challenge it, didn't pry. He just nodded once and returned to work. Nara exhaled slowly and picked the cutter back up. She didn't hum again, but the silence no longer felt like something waiting to snap shut around her throat. That night, she stepped outside after dinner. The sky above Theon 8 was a deep indigo, layered with stars that didn't move, didn't hum, didn't blink. No satellites left, no signal towers, just light so far away it couldn't mean anything anymore. Eli stayed inside, adjusting the vents in the ceiling. Nara crouched near the edge of the trench, fingers curling into the dusty soil. It wasn't good earth. Not really. Too acidic, too dry. But life still pushed up through it in stubborn green slivers. That made her feel something she didn't have words for. A breeze lifted her hair, brushed it across her cheek. She hadn't bothered to braid it that day. She hadn't thought to. She was halfway back to the cabin when she paused, turned, and looked behind her. The ridge she'd staggered down 3 days ago loomed in the darkness. For the first time, she wasn't afraid it would call her back. The next morning, Eli woke to the smell of boiled roots. Not a surprise. Nara had been cooking lately, but something about the scent was different, sharper, more layered. He stepped out of his room and found her standing over the pot, stirring slowly. Her hair was tied back this time. Not clean, but neater. Her eyes were alert, her posture less guarded. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He waited, letting her decide if she wanted to fill the silence. After a moment, she added, "I kept dreaming I forgot how to walk." He moved to the sink, rinsed his hands. "You didn't." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." She served them both. They ate in quiet, but it was no longer heavy. The silence between them had texture now, like fabric worn soft by time. Later that day, they worked on sealing the outer wall where rust had eaten through the lower corner. Nara volunteered to go outside and patch it from the other side. Eli watched from the window as she knelt in the dust, hands moving with efficiency. At one point, she used her foot to steady a panel that kept sliding, then pressed both palms against the sealant as it bonded. When she returned, streaks of grit marked her arms and cheeks. She wiped her face with a rag and handed him the empty canister. "Done," she said. "You missed a spot," he replied, pointing to a streak across her nose. Nara blinked. Then slowly, cautiously, she laughed. It was a short sound, abrupt, uncertain, but real. Eli didn't smile, but something in his shoulders softened. "Next time I'll wear goggles," she said. "You have goggles?" "Do you?" "No." They let that joke hang, the closest either of them had come to banter. By evening, her hands no longer trembled when she reached for tools. Her posture shifted, less like someone preparing to flinch, more like someone bracing against wind. She stood in front of the mirror in the storage bay, running a damp cloth over her face. The reflection startled her. She didn't look like the girl who had collapsed on Eli's floor. She didn't look like the product they'd tried to sell. She didn't look like a ghost. She looked alive, not beautiful, not radiant, just real. And that scared her more than anything else. That night, she curled up on the cot without being told. Eli still slept on the mat. They didn't speak, but she watched him for a long time before the room went dark. And she realized she wasn't watching because she was afraid. She was watching because she wanted to understand the kind of man who chose the floor when no one was watching. On the 5th day, she fixed the broken nutrient pump without being asked. Eli found her crouched beside the control panel, legs folded, hair tied in a short braid. She had pulled the casing apart and lined the components by size. Need help? He asked. No, I think it's a contact issue. He crouched beside her, watching her work. You're good at this, and he said. I used to be part of a tech group, she replied. Before. He didn't ask what before meant. He didn't need to. She rewired the contact points and snapped the cover back into place. The pump hissed to life, steady and quiet. See? She said. I do. She stood, dusted her hands, and for the first time, reached out. Her fingers brushed his shoulder, just once. Brief, not intimate, just human. They ate outside that night. Eli had dragged a dented table to the porch, and Nara brought the bowls. The wind was warm, carrying the smell of mineral rock and dry leaves. She sat beside him, not across. They didn't say much, but they didn't need to. At one point, she looked up and asked, How long have you been alone out here? 3 years. No one ever came? Sometimes. They didn't stay. Why did I? He set down his spoon. Because you didn't ask for safety. You asked not to be owned. She nodded slowly. That's the first thing I remember choosing. He looked at her. You can keep choosing. As long as you stay, this is yours too. Nara didn't respond right away, but when she stood, she picked up both bowls. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Later, as the stars came out, she stood in the doorway and whispered something Eli didn't hear. He looked up. What? She turned her head slightly. I said, I don't know what to do with kindness. He stood slowly, not approaching, just stepping beside her. You don't have to do anything with it, Nara swallowed. That's the hardest part. I know. They stood in silence. But it wasn't cold anymore, and it didn't stretch like distance. It just existed, the space between them, and that space was finally starting to feel like something that could hold them both. The morning started like all the others, quiet, except today, Nara didn't wait for permission to begin. When Eli emerged from the sleeping bay, she had already rerouted the solar intake, cleared the filter log, and was adjusting the copper nodes on the outer panel. She didn't notice him watching from the threshold until she stood up and wiped her palms on her thighs. You moved the array, he said. It was out of alignment, she replied, brushing hair from her face, losing 20% efficiency on the southern intake. He nodded. Nara waited for something. Approval, correction, resistance, none came. So she kept moving. By midday, she had built a rough chart of the water flow systems and posted it to the cabin wall. Eli stared at it for a moment, sipping from his mug. You're mapping it. You said the upper reservoir isn't reliable, she replied. I'm checking output pressure hour by hour. You weren't asked to. No, she said, watching him carefully. I wasn't, and he only nodded again. No compliment, but no dismissal either, and that, in a way, was more powerful. That afternoon, she climbed onto the roof. The panel was warping slightly at the edge, and she refused to let it collapse in the next windburst. The bolts were rusted, the frame slightly bent. Her arms burned as she stretched to hold the panel with one hand and fasten it with the other. The sun beat against her back. Her tunic stuck to her skin with sweat and effort. Below, Eli stepped outside. He didn't shout instructions, didn't grab her feet to steady her. Just stood beneath, one arm resting on the fence post, watching her work like a peer. When she finished, she descended slowly. Boots hit dirt, hands brushed rust. He handed her a rag. She took it, said nothing. But inside her, something massive shifted. No one had ever let her be capable without punishment. They ate later than usual. Nara's muscles ached, but the ache felt earned. She sat at the table, arms folded, hair still damp from the water she'd used to wash away the worst of the sweat and dust. She didn't bother hiding the long scar across her upper arm, didn't try to tuck the tunic higher across her chest. Eli didn't stare, didn't avoid looking either, just existed in the same room, unbothered by her presence. She tapped her fingers on the wood. What are you thinking? He asked. That I used to be smart, she said. You still are. No, I used to be allowed to be smart. Eli didn't reply. They let me work on repair bays in the early weeks, let me troubleshoot interface panels. Then the men started noticing, started saying I was too clever for my station. His hand stopped moving on the spoon. They reassigned me to surface duties, then to hosting, said smart girls ruined hierarchy. Eli exhaled. They weren't wrong, he said. Nara looked up. He met her eyes, voice steady. Smart girls do ruin hierarchy, That's why it's worth doing. Later, she stood near the mirror, brushing her hair back into a tight braid. Her reflection didn't scare her as much anymore. She could see her own features again. Not just the marks they'd left behind, the scar across her collarbone. The tattooed number faded near her ribs. The curve of her waist she was once told was too provocative. She let the braid fall, let the tunic slip slightly off her shoulder, watched her body as if it belonged to her. For the first time, it didn't feel like a tool or a liability. It felt like hers. That night, Eli laid down the floor mat as usual. Nara sat on the cot, knees to her chest, blanket pooled around her ankles. "Do you think people are born dangerous?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn. "No, but I think some are made that way, especially when they're told they have to be." She nodded to herself. Then after a long pause, she said it. "I was dangerous once, back when I still thought my voice mattered, back when I still wanted things." Eli rolled onto his side, facing her now. "What do you want now?" She looked at the ceiling. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think wanting isn't a crime." The next day, she tested something else. She raised her voice, not in anger, just to see. She called across the garden beds while Eli was adjusting the brine filter. "You going to realign the west intake? It's still short-circuiting." He didn't flinch, didn't hush her, just called back, "Yeah, I'll get to it after this one." Simple. Nothing happened. No one grabbed her wrist. No one told her to lower your tone. She stood there for a long moment, heart thudding, before continuing to work. That evening, she made a decision. She bathed, not to cleanse, to reclaim. She used warm water, measured sparingly from the solar tank, and scrubbed her body with focus. Her scars, her limbs, the hollow at her hip she used to hide. She dried herself in the open air, no shadows. She dressed slowly, deliberately. The tunic hung loose, but she didn't tighten it. She walked barefoot into the cabin, hair wet down her back, skin still warm. Eli was prepping the stove. He turned slightly, saw her, didn't react. Not with shock, not with desire, just with attention. Nara approached, hand resting on the table. "I wasn't allowed to feel beautiful," she said. Eli turned fully now. "You still think you're not?" "I still think being beautiful made me a target." He nodded once. "That's not your fault." She stepped closer. "Do you see me?" she asked. "I've always seen you." She reached out, touched his hand. "Do you want me?" "Yes," he said, "but not as payment." She nodded slowly. "Good," she whispered, and walked away. That night she didn't sleep. She lay on the cot, eyes open, blanket around her legs. Eli sat against the wall, writing notes in his soil log. She spoke softly. "I was punished for things I never understood." He looked up. "Like what?" "For smiling at the wrong moment. For answering too quickly. For being in the room when a man got angry." Eli closed the notebook. "I'm sorry." "You didn't do it." "I didn't stop it." She didn't respond. The silence stretched, but this time it didn't push them apart. It bridged them. She stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him. They didn't touch, just sat shoulder to shoulder. The warmth between them was quiet, but it was real. At some point, she leaned her head against his. Not romantic, not sexual, just grounding. "I want to be dangerous again," she whispered. "You are," he said. And they stayed like that. Two people in the dark, unowned, uncontrolled, unspoken, but finally aloud. Nara woke before the sun, not from fear, not from a noise, just awake. She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, watching the early light slip through the vent slats in broken orange lines. Her body felt rested for once. Her chest didn't ache. Her limbs didn't spasm from half-remembered flights. The blanket around her legs was soft with use. The pillow smelled faintly of dry sun and soil. She turned her head. Eli was still asleep across the room on the mat. One arm curled under his head, the other resting across his chest. His breathing was even, uncomplicated. Human. She sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter as she moved toward the stove. She didn't mean to make noise, but the kettle handle clicked against the metal pot. Eli stirred. His voice came soft. "It's okay." "I didn't mean to wake you," she said. "You didn't." He sat up, rubbed a hand over his face, and watched her for a long moment. "You slept," he said. "I did." "No dreams?" She paused. "I had one, but I didn't wake up afraid." He nodded. That was enough. Later, they worked in the field, replacing intake valves and shifting the nutrient trench slightly to the east, where the soil had begun to erode. Nara's arms ached from labor, but the ache felt purposeful. Her sweat wasn't from panic or punishment. It was from work she'd chosen. Eli moved beside her with quiet rhythm, saying little. But she noticed the way he passed her tools without being asked, the way he handed her water first, the way his eyes rested on her without ever drifting where they didn't belong. They were companions now, but something else stirred beneath it, something unsaid, not dangerous, not pressing, but present. That evening, they sat closer than usual by the stove. Their shoulders almost touched. Nara stared into the flame. "I used to think touch was a transaction," she said. "It was something I gave so I could eat, so I wouldn't get hit, so I'd be chosen last." Eli didn't respond. He waited. "But I started thinking," she continued, "what if I wanted it? Not for safety, not for survival, just because I chose it." She turned to him. "I don't know how to do this. I don't even know what I'm asking." Eli's voice was steady. "You don't have to know," she exhaled. "I think I want to be close to someone without paying for it." He nodded once. "Then I'll wait." Her eyes filled with something that wasn't quite tears. "What if I never do?" "I'll still wait." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because that's what you do when someone matters." She didn't speak for a long time after that, but she stayed beside him until the fire died down. The next morning she bathed with a kind of reverence. Not ritual, not performance, just presence. She scrubbed every inch of her skin like she was peeling off old definitions. Her scars, her tattoos, the dirt behind her knees, the small birthmark at her hip. She didn't hide herself in a towel afterward. She dried slowly in the sun, let the warmth settle into her chest. Then she dressed, loose clothes, comfortable, familiar. She tied her hair up high. When she entered the cabin again, Eli was at the table, sketching something onto a scrap of old paper. He looked up, and for the first time, she didn't flinch at being seen. He didn't scan her body, didn't appraise her, just smiled slightly. "You look awake," he said. "I feel it." Later, she cooked. Not for him, not to serve, just because she wanted to. She seasoned the broth with herbs she'd found drying in the back panel. Added a pinch of salt Eli had been hoarding since last season. Stirred it carefully, tasting, adjusting. She handed him a bowl, sat beside him, cross-legged. They ate in quiet. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and folded her hands in her lap. "I want to ask something." He turned slightly. "Ask. If I asked you to touch me, not because you earned it, but because I wanted it, would you?" Eli's eyes met hers. "I would wait until you were certain." "I think I am." "Then say it." She swallowed. "I want you to touch me." His hands moved slowly. He reached across the space between them and laid his palm over hers. Nothing rushed, nothing assumed. Her fingers curled into his. She exhaled, and for the first time the air didn't taste like fear. That night she didn't wait for him to lie down. She crawled onto the cot and patted the space beside her. Eli raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He moved slowly, lying on his back, leaving space between them. Nara shifted closer, rested her cheek against his shoulder. They lay like that for a long time, unmoving, just breathing. Her hand found his again. No sparks, no music, just warmth, and for the first time in her life, she was the one who chose closeness. Later, when the room had darkened and the wind shifted outside, she spoke again. "I've never been held without someone trying to take something." Eli's voice was quiet. "Then I'll just hold you." Her head pressed tighter against his chest. "I don't know how to relax." "Then don't. Just rest." And she did. She woke in the night, still in his arms. He hadn't moved. Neither had she. Her breath was steady, her limbs soft. She felt his heartbeat beneath her ear. Slow even, not demanding. She looked up at him, his face barely lit by the orange slats of light from the stove. "I want more," she whispered, his eyes open. "Not because I owe it, not because I'm afraid, but because I want you." He didn't move immediately. He waited. Let her lean in first, let her lips brush his, let her body press against his. Not as invitation, but as claim. They undressed slowly, together. No shame, No urgency, only presence. When his hands touched her, it wasn't to consume, it was to know. When her lips found his, it wasn't to please, it was to speak. And when they moved together, skin against skin, it wasn't for escape, it was for arrival. She led. He followed. And when their rhythm found its breath, she whispered his name. Not for safety, not for negotiation, but for anchor. Afterward, they didn't move apart. She stayed against him, chest to chest, heart to heart. "I'm not afraid," she said. "You never had to be," he replied. And she believed him. Because for the first time, someone had waited. And for the first time, she'd chosen not to run. The morning after, Nara didn't rise with a start. There was no shock, no flinch, no scramble to cover herself. Her body didn't feel taken. It felt occupied by warmth, by ache, by presence. She was still in Eli's arms. His chest rose slowly beneath her palm. His breath moved against her hair. One of his hands rested across her waist, not gripping, not holding, just being there. She stayed like that for a long time, listening, not to danger, not to orders, just to the rhythm of shared silence. Eventually she sat up. Her hair fell forward across her face in pale tangles. The blanket shifted down her back. She didn't pull it up. She didn't hide. She looked at her body in the morning light. Marked, curved, lived in. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a thing reclaimed. She felt like a person returning. Eli stirred behind her. "You okay?" he murmured, voice still thick with sleep. She turned slightly, met his eyes. "I don't regret it." His lips parted slightly. "Neither do I." Nara leaned down, kissed his shoulder, then stood and walked toward the basin without waiting for approval or invitation. They spent that morning apart, not out of avoidance, but because the world still needed tending. Nara cleaned the filtration membranes. Eli checked the condenser unit. She hummed again, just under her breath, as she cleared sediment from the feed lines. When she stepped back inside for tools, she passed him at the entry and brushed her fingers along his wrist. Just once, not a question, not a need, just contact. Eli looked up and smiled with his eyes. She smiled back, then kept walking. Later that day, Eli brought her a rough-hewn notebook. "I thought you might want to keep records," he said, "for the water logs, or anything." Nara turned it over in her hands. The cover was patched leather, stained and faded, but the pages were blank. All of them. "Blank paper used to terrify me," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because I wasn't allowed to fill it." She opened to the first page, picked up the stub of graphite he offered, and for the first time in years she wrote her name. Nara, letter by letter, as if every stroke were a reclamation. That night, after the lanterns dimmed and the soil temp stabilized, they sat on the floor by the stove sharing tea from a single chipped cup. Nara leaned into Eli's side, her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing the soft threads of his shirt. "Are you ever afraid?" she asked. Eli sipped. "Of what?" "Of someone staying." He thought for a moment. "Only if I think they're staying for the wrong reasons." She shifted slightly, looked up at him. "And if I said I wasn't staying because I owed you, or because you fed me, or because I need protection?" His voice was quiet. "Then I'd believe you. And if I said I was staying because this is the first place that didn't ask me to shrink?" Eli turned to her. "Then I'd be honored." By the third day, the cabin began to change. Nara reorganized the storage crates. She labeled the tools. She added hooks by the door. She sorted the dried herbs, repacked the ration shelf, and refolded the bedding. Eli didn't stop her, didn't ask why. He just watched her move like someone making space hers. Not invading, not borrowing, belonging. They worked together on a new irrigation line for the south plot. The wind had shifted again, and the older tubes weren't catching enough condensation overnight. Nara knelt beside Eli, helping him solder the coupling. Her hands moved with ease now, her posture confident. When the joint sparked, she didn't flinch. "You've done this before," he said. "I remember things better when I'm not afraid." He didn't reply, but he reached over and squeezed her hand once, and she let him. That night she cooked again. This time, not just broth. She soaked root fiber in brine, chopped salted rind, and added dried spice he didn't even know she'd salvaged. The smell filled the room, sharp, earthy, comforting. Eli sat at the table, watching her move. "You look peaceful," he said. Nara tasted the broth, stirred. I don't know if I've ever looked like that. You do now. She paused, then smiled. I like hearing that. When they ate, she sat in his lap. Not for seduction, not for dominance, just because she wanted to feel him underneath her. Steady, grounded. He didn't react with hunger. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his forehead against her shoulder. You feel like choice, she whispered. So do you, he replied. Later, in the low hum of lamplight, she folded into his side on the cot again. Their clothes stayed on, their hands stayed intertwined, and their breath moved as one, not toward urgency, but toward home. In the middle of the night, she woke from a soundless dream. Eli was still asleep beside her. She rose quietly, wrapped the coat around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was cold, but not bitter. The wind carried the scent of mineral dust and distant salt. She walked to the ridge where she'd once collapsed, kneeled, touched the earth. It wasn't good soil, still brittle, still acidic, but life had started pushing up through it. Nara looked up at the sky. It was clearer than usual, stars like scars across a dark canvas. She whispered into the wind, I'm not a thing. Then louder, I'm not an offering. Then with fire, I'm a woman who chose to stay. When she returned, Eli was still awake. He looked at her from the cot, his hand resting on her pillow. You okay? She climbed in beside him, tucked her face into his chest. I am. He stroked her back. What did you find out there? She looked up. That I'm done asking permission. They made love again the next night, but this time was different. She led again, but not to prove anything, not to reclaim, just to connect. They undressed slowly, smiled more, moved more freely. Her laugh came easier. His hands were more confident. And when they finished, tangled in sweat and breath and warmth, she looked into his eyes and whispered, This isn't survival anymore. Eli nodded. No, it's living. The first sign of the stranger was the boot prints. Eli noticed them on the north perimeter just after sunrise. Fresh, shallow, scattered near the edge of the trench, where the sand held shape before wind smoothed it. Not animal, not his. The stride was light, small. He stared at them for a long time before brushing the heel of his glove over the trail and walking back to the cabin. Inside, Nara was stripping dried roots into a storage jar. He didn't speak right away. When he did, it was calm. We have a visitor. She looked up sharply. Where? North side. Close enough to watch. Armed? Didn't see weapons, but didn't see them either. Just prints. Nara wiped her hands slowly. She didn't panic, but her eyes changed. The space behind them narrowed, like a door shutting inside her. She stepped away from the table. They waited. For 3 hours, no one came close. Eli kept the outer vents sealed. Nara stayed inside, gathering the small blade she'd tucked under the cot months ago and folding it into her sleeve. Her posture was different now. Shoulders square, feet braced, not helpless. Not the woman who had collapsed in the dirt weeks ago. Eli stood at the hatch near the stove, arms crossed, eyes calm. When the knock finally came, it was faint, almost a tap. He didn't move right away, just looked at Nara. She gave one nod. He keyed the door open. The figure outside was small, female, barefoot, pale, not bruised, not bleeding, just thin, hair hacked short, clothes torn, not for effect, but from time. She looked 16, maybe younger, but her eyes were too still, too flat. Nara stepped forward before Eli could speak. Who sent you? The girl flinched slightly. No one. I came alone. Nara's voice didn't soften. That's not an answer. How far back is your last mark? 3 days, the girl said. They left me. Said I was too small to trade. Eli stood still. Nara's jaw clenched. What's your name? Eli asked gently. The girl hesitated. Don't have one. You do, Nara said. They just made you forget. They let her in, fed her. She didn't ask for it, didn't speak much. Sat on the floor, one leg curled under her, back pressed against the wall. Her eyes never left the door. Nara watched her carefully, not with suspicion, but with understanding. After the girl finished eating, she said, You're not like the others. Eli shook his head. No. Nara crouched beside her. What did they call you? Unit Delta 6. Nara nodded slowly. She reached into the satchel hanging from the wall, pulled out the notebook Eli had given her. opened to the second page. Handed the graphite stub to the girl. "Write your name," she said. "I don't have one." "Then make one." The girl stared at the page, then slowly, painfully, scratched out a word. Mira. That night, they made a bed for Mira in the supply bay. She didn't want the cot, said it made her feel watched. Nara laid a blanket on the floor beside the storage crates, fluffed a pillow with an old towel, and tucked an herb satchel beneath it for scent. "You don't have to stay," Mira said. Nara looked at her. "I'm not staying for you. I'm staying for who I used to be." Mira didn't respond, but she didn't look away. Later, when Nara curled up beside Eli in the cot, her body was tense. Not from fear, but from memory. "She reminds me of me," she said. "I know. I almost forgot what it felt like to be that young and that hollow." Eli brushed a hand over her shoulder. "You're not hollow anymore." Nara turned toward him. "No," she whispered, "but I remember the echo." The next day, Mira wandered the perimeter while Eli and Nara repaired the water channel intake. She didn't speak, didn't offer help, but didn't run. Nara kept watching her from the corner of her eye. At one point, Mira picked up a loose spanner and turned it in her hand. Nara moved to her side. "You know how to use that?" Mira nodded. "Show me." The girl knelt, began tightening the valve. Nara watched in silence. When Mira finished, Nara crouched beside her. "Who taught you?" "A man named Ferrex. He liked to keep his toys functional." Nara's throat tightened. "He's not here now," she said. "I know. But the skills still are." Mira looked at her. "That's the first time anyone said that like it's good." Nara didn't smile, but her voice was steady. "You're not broken. You're built." That evening, Eli cooked. Nara sat with Mira near the stove, wrapping dried cloth into new patches for the filtration cover. "Do you know how to fight?" Mira asked suddenly. Nara looked at her. "Yes." "Did you ever kill someone?" Nara didn't flinch. "No, but I almost did once. He laughed when I said no." "What happened?" "He's missing a tooth." Mira gave a ghost of a smile. Nara set the cloth aside and met her eyes. "You don't have to be dangerous to survive here." Mira nodded. "But I want to be anyway." Nara leaned in slightly. "Then we'll teach you, but not for them. For you." That night, after Mira had fallen asleep near the heat vent, Nara stood by the mirror. She looked at her reflection, then at the cot behind her. Eli sat, legs folded, watching her. "She thinks I'm strong," Nara said. "You are. But I'm still shaking. You're allowed to. I don't want to break again." He rose, stepped behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "You won't. Not here." She turned in his arms, rested her forehead against his chest. "I want to be strong without being hard." "You already are." They made love again that night, not because they needed comfort, but because desire didn't need to come from pain anymore. They touched like it was a language, spoke with hands, breath, sighs. When Nara moaned into his mouth, it wasn't from hunger, it was from wholeness. When Eli whispered her name, it wasn't from need, it was from knowing. And afterward, when she lay against him, chest to chest, she whispered, "I thought I was ruined." He stroked her back. "You were never ruined," he said. "You were waiting to be seen." The next morning, Mira woke to the smell of tea and salt. She stepped into the kitchen and found Nara stirring a pot. Eli sat at the table, reviewing a sketch circuit on a salvaged sheet of polyfilm. "Is there enough for me?" Mira asked. Nara turned and handed her a cup. "You're part of the day now." Mira blinked and slowly took it. That afternoon, Nara and Mira walked the ridge together. The sky above them was pale blue streaked with white. The wind tugged at their sleeves. "You think I'll ever forget what it felt like to be owned?" Mira asked. Nara looked out over the canyon. "No, but you'll remember what it feels like to be free louder." And for the first time, Mira smiled with teeth, because the ruin hadn't broken her. It had taught her what was worth protecting. And who? Nara felt it first, not through sound or sight, but through her skin. The air shifted just after midday. It lost its heat, grew dense. The wind that carried dry soil across the southern trench became inconsistent, heavy, like it couldn't make up its mind. She stood on the roof, Mira handing up a patch kit from below. They'd been replacing the warped plasteel along the solar frame when the stillness hit. Nara paused, one hand on a rivet bolt. Her brow furrowed. "Do you feel that?" Mira looked up. What? The air. It's too quiet. Eli emerged from the shed, wiping sweat from his temple. His eyes scanned the sky. And then he said, low and certain, "Storm's coming." By the hour's end, the air pressure dropped so fast Mira's ears popped. The clouds over the ridge turned yellowish, thick with static. Eli confirmed it. Acid rainfall, the kind that melted through untreated polyglass and carried chemical residue from the salt plains 2 sectors west. Nara didn't flinch. She moved fast, focused, covered the planters, pulled down the thermal sheeting, reinforced the roof hatch while Mira sealed the floor vents. This wasn't her first storm, but it was the first she didn't face alone. When the first drops hit the cabin roof, they didn't patter. They hissed, thick, oily, tinted green at the edges. The vents groaned. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped almost 10 degrees in under 20 minutes. Mira curled near the stove, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't cry, but her shoulders were taut, rigid. Nara moved to her side, placed a palm on her back. "We're sealed tight," she said. "This cabin held through worse." Mira didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I used to run when storms came. I thought if I kept moving, they wouldn't find me." Nara nodded. "I know that logic. Now I feel stupid." "You're not," Eli said from across the room, sealing the last hatch bolt. "You were surviving. That's never stupid." They spent the next 2 days inside. No leaving. No light except the filtered glow through the sealed slats. But it didn't feel like a prison. They cleaned tools, sorted supplies, reorganized storage. Nara taught Mira how to reinforce insulation tape, how to boil water in a blackout, how to repair small wiring with limited tools. They laughed once when Mira shocked herself and dropped a connector. Nara raised an eyebrow. Mira grinned. "Told you I could do it. Never said I'd do it gracefully." That night, when the storm howled loud enough to rattle the door frame, Mira flinched and dropped her tin cup. The sound wasn't even loud, but it echoed. Her breath sharpened. Her whole body froze. Nara saw it, saw the panic in her eyes, the waiting for pain. She moved slowly, picked up the cup, set it on the table, then returned to Mira and simply stood beside her. Eli passed Mira a new cup of water without a word. They said nothing, but Mira took it, drank, breathed, and didn't run. Later, when Mira had gone to sleep in the storage bay, Nara stood near the window, watching the storm flash green lightning across the distant plain. Her voice was low. "I used to believe storms meant I had to leave." Eli stepped behind her, not touching, just present. "I used to believe they were signs I'd overstayed." He waited. "But now, for the first time, I'm thinking maybe storms are just weather." Eli smiled. "Weather we prepare for and wait through." Nara turned, faced him. "You always waited, didn't you?" "I still am." "You don't have to anymore." She stepped into his arms, and the storm outside, for all its fury, meant nothing to the warmth pressed between them. The third day, the storm began to break. The rain thinned. The sky went from sickly green to dull gray. The air tasted of chemicals and rust, but it was breathable. Eli opened the main hatch slowly. Nara stepped out with Mira. The ground was slick, the soil scorched in places, but life wasn't gone. A few of the planters had held. Some of the roots had survived. Mira crouched beside one sprout that had curled but not snapped. She touched the leaf carefully. "It didn't die." Nara crouched beside her. "Because we protected it." That night, they shared a meal together. 1 pot, 3 bowls. The cabin smelled like boiled herbs and warmth. Mira said grace for the first time. Not a prayer, just a sentence. "I'm glad I didn't run." Nara reached over, squeezed her wrist. Eli smiled. "So are we." After dinner, Mira fell asleep with her head on Nayara's lap. Eli sat across from them, eyes soft. Nayara stroked Mira's hair gently. "She trusts me," she said. "She should." Nayara looked up. "I trust me." That was the part that still surprised her. Later, alone in the cot with Eli, Nara curled into his chest. He whispered into her hair, "You know, I'm not waiting anymore." She looked up, half smiling. "No?" "No, because you're already here." She kissed him slowly, not because the storm was gone, but because they were still standing. And standing with someone after so much falling meant everything. In the days that followed, they cleaned up the damage. Mira patched the fence with Nara guiding her hand. Eli rewired the light grid. Nara replanted the roots that had survived. Together, they moved through each task with quiet focus. The storm had come, but it hadn't broken them, and it hadn't driven them apart. If anything, it proved they could outlast it. Together. It started with a shadow across the ridge. Nara saw it first, just a ripple against the late morning light, too upright for wind, too slow for a drifting animal. She set down the soil sensor, narrowed her eyes. Mira noticed her stillness and froze beside the grow beds. Eli stepped from the shed, instinct sharp but voice calm. Movement? Nara nodded once. They didn't speak as they moved. Eli sealed the hatch. Mira locked the water drums. Nara wiped her hands and walked back toward the cabin without hurry. Not panic, preparation. The figure became clearer within the hour. Human, tall, well-fed. Metal on the boots, signaling trade faction. A light gun holstered high but not drawn. He stopped at the edge of the fence line, hands raised casually. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he called. "Just looking for something that belongs to me." Nara's spine went rigid. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes narrowed into something colder than Eli had ever seen in her. The man looked younger than he had any right to. Clean jacket, no burns, no ash on his sleeves. He wore the sleek arrogance of someone who lived in places where food came wrapped and violence came outsourced. He looked at Eli, then Nara, then back. "I came for her." Eli's stance didn't change. "She's not yours. You don't even know what she is." "I know exactly what she is." The man's smile tightened. "She's marked inventory, tagged in a database that still pings even without signal." Nara stepped forward now, slow, deliberate. "Don't talk about me like I'm a shipment," she said. He turned to her fully. "I'm talking about a transaction left incomplete. You ran. They want you back." Nara's lip curled. "No one wants me. They want the message my return sends. Your property." Her voice came like flint on stone. "Say that again. Slower." He hesitated. Nara walked right to the edge of the fence line. "I'm not going with you." "You don't have a choice." "I already made one." Eli stood behind her, silent. The man stepped forward, but Nara raised her voice, steady, unshaken. "My name is Nara." The man scoffed. "That's not your tag." "No, it's the name I wrote myself." He looked at Eli now. "You're harboring escape property. You know what the penalty for that used to be?" "I don't care what it used to be," Eli said. "It doesn't apply here. You can't just decide that." "I can. And I did. We're not part of your system anymore." Mira stepped out from behind the hatch. She was holding a tool, not a weapon, but her stance was clear. "This is home," she said. The man frowned. "You've got a whole rebellion going on in there, huh?" Eli's voice stayed even. "We've got a home, not a rebellion. The difference is, we didn't take it from anyone." Nara stepped forward past the fence line. The man's hand twitched near his hip. She didn't stop, didn't even flinch. "You can report me," she said, "but you'll do it alone, because the next step you take forward will be your last." The man hesitated, but it wasn't fear that made him step back. It was certainty. He saw it in her eyes. The woman who had once begged not to be turned in was gone. This one didn't beg. This one belonged to herself. He left. No threat, no parting insult. Just a tight turn and a long walk back into the haze. Nara stood still until he vanished beyond the ridge. Then she exhaled, and her hands began to shake. Eli was at her side before she could fall. She didn't collapse, but her knees gave slightly. He held her, not to rescue her, to be there. Mira walked slowly toward them and wrapped her arms around Nara's waist. They stood like that for a long time. All three, unmoved by the ghost behind them. That night the cabin was quiet. Eli cooked. Nara stared into the stove's glow, eyes far but clear. Mira sat near the window sketching in the notebook Nara had given her. When they sat to eat, Nara didn't touch her bowl at first. Her voice came soft. "I was called by many things. Tags, numbers, code names." Eli looked at her. "But I never had a name someone said like it was mine." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I didn't give you your name," he said. "You did." She looked up. "But you said it like it mattered." "It does." She blinked hard. Mira spoke next. I want a last name. They looked at her. Can we choose those two? Nara smiled. You can choose anything now. Later that night, Nara lay in Eli's arms, her skin bare against his, their breathing slow. Her voice trembled only slightly. Why didn't you draw your gun? Because I didn't need to, he said. You already knew how to stand. She nodded. I almost didn't believe it. But you did. She pressed her lips to his chest. I'll never forget how you said my name. And I'll never stop saying it. When they slept, it was deep, unbroken, earned. The storm had passed, the man was gone. But her name remained, not a brand, not a claim. A choice. The next morning, Mira carved letters into a piece of reclaimed wood. She used a dull blade, took her time. When she finished, she showed it to Nara and Eli. It read, This is not a place you take people from. Nara hung it above the door, and for the first time, she didn't worry someone would come to take it down. Because the name over that threshold now meant something. The season turned without announcement. No storms, no collapse. Just a gentler light across the ridge. The sun, still filtered through dust, lost its sharp edge. The wind softened. The soil, once dry and stubborn, now held moisture just long enough for sprouts to stretch farther before wilting. Inside the cabin, the quiet changed too. It no longer felt like silence. It felt like space. A space that held voices when they came and kept them warm when they didn't. Nara woke each morning before the others. Not because she feared danger. Not because she had to. Because the dawn light on Eli's face was worth waking for. Sometimes she'd lie there watching the slow rise of his chest. His hand, heavy but not possessive, draped across her waist. His fingers twitching in dreams that didn't make him flinch. And she would close her eyes again, just to memorize the rhythm of being safe. Mira changed too. She walked differently now, still light, still cautious, but no longer like she was expecting a trap under every step. She spoke more, laughed sometimes. She started hanging her tools on the same wall as Eli's. She labeled them, cleaned them. She started humming. Not the same tune as Nara, her own. Nara had once seen herself in Mira's shadows. Now she saw her in the light. They built a greenhouse dome that month. It was Mira's idea. Eli salvaged an old lens frame from the eastern ridge, and Nara repurposed insulation tubing to hold the joints. Together they pieced it slowly, meticulously, welding and sealing and patching every fracture. It wasn't elegant, but when the structure stood, catching soft heat and condensation, it felt earned. Inside, they planted what they had saved: salt roots, water beans, soft leaf herbs. Nara knelt beside Mira, hands in soil. You ever think we'd be planting instead of running? Mira smiled faintly. I used to think the world was made of doors slammed in my face. Nara pressed a seed deeper. Now? Now I think it's what you build when no one's watching. Eli built a table for the center of the room. Rough planks, uneven legs, sturdy in the way real things are. They ate there every evening, and when the wind picked up outside, they didn't lean away from the windows. They leaned in, because it was their glass now, their walls, their food, their fire. Nara wrote more. At first it was lists, plant cycles, inventory, growth rates, then sketches, then paragraphs. One night Eli found her sitting on the porch, notebook in her lap, staring at the stars. You writing another list? He asked. She looked up, smiled. I'm writing the first page of my story. You want help? She handed him the book. You're already in it. They didn't talk about the past much anymore, but when they did, it didn't hurt. Eli told her about his first assignment on a corporate colony grid, how he used to think systems were smarter than people. How long it took him to understand that the systems were built by people, flawed and greedy and scared. Nara told him how she used to fold herself into shapes that fit inside other people's expectations. Mira shared how she used to dream of running so fast no one could ever name her again. They sat on the floor when they talked. No table, no walls between stories, just floor and flame, and the knowing that nothing said could undo the life they had made. That winter, they bathed together in the old tank Eli converted into a thermal tub. It took half a day to heat the water with solar bricks, but when they eased into it, skin on skin, back to chest, hand to thigh, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Eli traced her collarbone. Nara leaned back into him, and Mira, on the other side of the curtain, hummed while shelling salt pods into storage jars. There was no urgency, no tension, just a life unfolding without force. Nara cut her hair in spring, short, uneven at the tips, streaked pale from sun. She stood in the mirror and smiled at herself. This looks like me. Eli, watching from behind, nodded. It always did. She kissed him, lips light and warm and certain. Now it feels like me. Later that season, Mira asked if she could carve her full name into the cabin wall. Nara handed her the blade. Mira etched slowly, Mira Hallen. I gave myself my father's first name, she said. I don't remember him, but it feels right. Eli added a shelf beneath it. Nara placed her journal there. Below it, she carved hers, Nara Vale. She didn't ask. She didn't check with Eli. But when he saw it, his smile reached into the corners of his eyes. He traced the letters, pressed his forehead to hers. You don't need my name to belong. I know, she whispered, but I wanted to choose it. That night, as they sat curled together in the cot, Mira asleep across the room, the cabin warm and still, Nara traced circles on Eli's chest. We never left this place, she murmured. No. Everything changed, but we're still here. He kissed her temple. That's what roots are. I thought I was too broken for roots. You weren't, he said. You were just waiting for soil. She laughed softly. And now? Eli kissed her mouth, slow and deep. Now all of it is ours. In the final weeks before the next storm season, the garden bloomed faster than expected. Nara pulled water beans from the roots with her bare hands, dirt under her nails, sun across her neck. Mira walked the fence line, adjusting new solar lamps. Eli installed a wind gauge. Each day folded into the next like pages of a story not written by fate, but crafted by hands that had earned stillness. They added a second cot, not because they needed space, but because this home was not made for limits. It was made for choosing. On the final evening of summer, Nara sat beside the new fire pit, Mira braiding her hair while Eli stirred soup in the solar pot. She looked at the sky, then at the cabin, then at the garden, the dome, the tools hanging neatly along the wall. And then she said, not to anyone in particular, I don't feel like I'm surviving anymore. Mira smiled. Because you're not. Eli turned, ladle in hand. You're living. Nara closed her eyes, breathed in the warmth, and whispered, all of it is ours.